Imagine a life where your greatest suffering has already served its purpose, not as punishment, but as initiation, not as tragedy, but as transformation. What if everything you feared would destroy you has actually been the very thing that set you free? 6 keynotes for this journey. Keynote 1. The absence of bitterness in your reflection. The first sign that you have truly passed your soul's most painful test is a peculiar one. It arrives not as a thunderbolt, but as a subtle quietness. When you find yourself thinking back to the events that once threatened to consume you entirely, you notice something remarkable has shifted. The story no longer burns your mouth when you speak it. The old resentments, those familiar companions that lived in your chest like stones, have somehow dissolved. This is not to say the pain never existed or that you have forgotten. Rather, something is fundamentally reorganized within your being. Bitterness is a particular texture of consciousness. It requires company, stand feeding. It demands that you return to the wound again and again, that you rehearse the injustice, that you maintain the separation between yourself and those who hurt you. But when you have passed through your soul's most profound test, the energy required to maintain bitterness simply evaporates. You become aware of how expensive that resentment was, how it cost you presence, creativity, and the ability to engage fully with the present moment. The absence of bitterness doesn't mean you have become weak or that you have forgotten your own worth. Quite the opposite. It suggests a different kind of strength has emerged, one rooted in recognition rather than resistance. You recognize that holding on to bitterness was never punishment for anyone else. It was only punishment for yourself. The test has been passed when you can remember your suffering and feel not the sting of injustice, but something closer to understanding. Your perspective has expanded to include the possibility that those who hurt you were themselves trapped in patterns of their own making. This doesn't excuse their actions, but it contextualizes them. And in that contextualization lies the first profound freedom. You are no longer bound by the need to be wronged. The narrative that gave bitterness its power has been rewritten by a deeper intelligence within you. Keynote 2. The capacity to love what once harmed you. Perhaps the most transformative sign that you have passed through your soul's darkest trial is the emerging capacity to extend genuine compassion toward those who caused your greatest pain. This is not a sentimental love, nor is it forgiveness in the conventional sense. It is something far more sophisticated and subtle. It is the ability to hold space for the full humanity of those who harmed you while simultaneously honoring your own experience of that harm. When you find yourself able to do this, something miraculous occurs. The universe of your consciousness expands. Where once there was only the narrow reality of victimhood and violation, now there exists a more spacious perspective. You begin to see that those who hurt you were often operating from their own wounds, their own fears, their own desperate attempts to feel safe or powerful in a world that terrified them. This realization doesn't erase what happened. The injury remains real, but your relationship to it transforms completely. To love what once harmed you is to recognize that the same universal energy flows through both of you. The same fundamental consciousness animates your enemy and yourself. When you arrive at this understanding, something in you naturally softens, not because you are weak, but because you have become strong enough to extend mercy, strong enough to see beyond the mask of cruelty to the suffering beneath it. This capacity is the mark of a soul that is genuinely transformed. It cannot be faked. You cannot force yourself into this love. It arrives only after you have done the deeper work of truly understanding that forgiveness is not a gift you give to others. It is a gift you give to yourself. It is the release of the poison you have been holding, the decision to stop drinking the bitter water and expecting others to die of thirst. When you can contemplate someone who once devastated you and feel not rage, but a quiet knowing, a recognition that they too have been caught in the dream of separation and suffering, then you have passed through the fire and emerged transformed. This is one of the soul's greatest accomplishments. Keynote 3. The silence that replaces your inner storm. exists a peculiar quiet that descends upon you only after you have journeyed through genuine transformation. It is not the quiet of suppression or numbness. It is the quiet of a question that has finally been answered, a mystery that has been solved, a storm that has exhausted itself and given way to clear skies. Before you passed your test, your mind was perhaps a tempest. Constant inte, INL dialogue, endless replaying of conversations, intrusive visions of what you wished you had said or done differently. The inner space was crowded with ghosts and accusations and regrets. But something shifts when the soul has truly metabolized its deepest pain. The obsessive thinking naturally diminishes. Not because you have been forced it into silence through discipline or willpower, but because the charge has dissipated. There is no longer fuel feeding the fire of rumination. When you notice that you can go entire days without thinking about your pain, that the memory has become neutral rather than colored with emotion, you have passed an important threshold. This silence is not emptiness. Rather, it is a fullness of a different kind. It is the silence that contains everything because it is no longer frantically searching for resolution. The inner chatter has quieted because understanding has arrived. Understanding is always accompanied by peace. When you truly understand something, not intellectually but at the cellular level, the need to think about it obsessively evaporates. You know, and in knowing you rest. This silence that replaces the storm is one of the most reliable indicators that you have genuinely transformed. It tells you that something in your relationship to your suffering has fundamentally shifted. You are no longer wrestling with it. You are no longer trying to solve it or fix it or reverse it. Acceptance has arrived, and with it comes this profound quietness. Your nervous system has learned that it is safe. Your body has internalized the knowledge that you have survived, that whatever test was presented to your soul, you did not break. You bent, you transformed, you integrated, but you did not break. And in that knowing, the fierce activity of the mind finally settles into peace. Key note 4. The wisdom that emerges without words. There is a particular quality to wisdom that has been earned through genuine suffering. It cannot be taught in class, rooms, or acquired through reading alone. It can only be forged in the furnace of lived experience, in the depths where your soul has confronted its own limitations and emerged with new understanding. When you have passed your deepest test, you find yourself naturally speaking and acting with a wisdom that surprises even you. Not because you have become an expert in philosophy or psychology, but because you have become an expert in the territory of human suffering itself. You have walked where others are still walking. You have emerged from where many are still trapped. And this gives your words a particular weight and authenticity. People sense this. They are drawn to your presence because there is something in you that has been clarified by fire. Genuine wisdom is always accompanied by humility. The person who has truly transformed never positions themselves as above others or special. They recognize that their test was their test, and another's test is theirs. Wisdom that has arrived through true suffering knows the fragility of human beings. It knows the terrible loneliness of being trapped in fear. It knows the desperation that can drive people to harmful actions. And from this knowing flows a natural compassion, a natural ability to see the best in people, even when they are at their worst. This wisdom doesn't require articulation. You can simply be in the presence of someone who is genuinely transformed and feel it. There is a resonance, a frequency, an attunement to what is true beneath the surface of things. This is the wisdom that emerges after passing through your soul's most difficult test. It is not learned from books. It is lived. It is embodied, and it speaks without needing to use many words. When others encounter this wisdom in you, they sense the authenticity of it. They recognize that you have been somewhere real, that you have touched something true, that you are not merely repeating what you have been taught, but rather offering the gift of what why. Have become Ibraki keynote 5. The freedom found in acceptance, acceptance is perhaps the most misunderstood concept in the language of spiritual transformation. Many believe it means resignation, that you have given up, that you have surrendered your will to circumstances you despise. But true acceptance is nothing of the sort. It is the most powerful stance a human being can take because it represents the moment when you stop fighting reality and therefore become capable of actually changing it. When you have passed your soul's most painful test, you arrive at a peculiar freedom, the freedom of complete acceptance, not of the people who hurt you necessarily, or the circumstances as they exist in external form, but acceptance of what is, acceptance of what has already occurred, acceptance of your own role in your story. This acceptance does not arrive through force of will. It arrives when you recognize that fighting against what has already happened is like trying to change yesterday. It's impossible. And the fight itself creates all manner of internal suffering. But when you accept that this has been your path, that these have been your trials, that this is the material your soul chose to work with, something liberates in you. You stop the exhausting project of wishing things had been different. You stop the mental loops of if only and why me. You recognize that your life has been perfect for your evolution, especially in, its moments of terrible difficulty. This acceptance brings with it a strange freedom. You are no longer bound by the need to defend yourself against reality. You are no longer expending energy trying to convince yourself or others that your suffering should not have happened. You can meet your life as it actually is, rather than as you wish it would be. And from this meeting, authentic change and growth become possible. Freedom is not the absence of difficulty. Freedom is the absence of internal resistance to what is actually happening. And you can walk through your life with this quality of acceptance. You have truly passed your test. You have learned one of the soul's deepest lessons, Hebrew key, note 6. The paradoxical joy that lives within sorrow he free. Perhaps the most profound sign that you have passed your soul's most difficult test is the strange capacity to feel joy while holding sorrow, to experience lightness and gratitude even while acknowledging pain. This is not manic positivity or toxic optimism. This is something far more real and far more beautiful. It is the recognition that life is simultaneously tragic and magnificent, and both can be true at once. Before transformation, consciousness tends to be binary. Things are either good or bad, either worth celebrating or worth mourning. But when you have genuinely passed through your soul's deepest initiation, this rigid division collapses. You begin to perceive that sorrow and joy are not opposites, but rather different frequencies of the same fundamental aliveness. When you can sit with both at once, grateful for the simple gift of breathing, of sensing the world through your senses, of being alive, even while acknowledging that you have suffered deeply, you have arrived at a paradoxical wisdom. You recognize that your suffering has not negated your life's value. In fact, it has deepened your appreciation for it. You understand the preciousness of this moment, this breath, this existence, in a way that perhaps you never could have without having tasted genuine loss. This is the paradox that marks genuine transformation. Life becomes simultaneously more serious and more joyful. More serious because you understand its fragility and its significance. More joyful because you have learned that meaning and beauty persist even in difficulty, perhaps especially in difficulty. When you find yourself able to laugh genuinely, to feel real delight and pleasure, while also holding compassion for the wounded parts of yourself and others, you know that you have truly transcended your deepest trial. This is the mark of a soul that has been remade by fire and emerged not hardened but refined, not closed but opened, not cynical but wisely attuned to the full spectrum of human existence. Ebreka conclusion. Ebreka. So here we stand at the end of this exploration, having traversed the terrain of transformation and the 7 signs that mark a soul's passage through its most demanding trial. What began as a question, how do we know when we have truly passed through our deepest suffering, now reveals itself to be something far more intimate and immediate. You know not because someone told you, you know because you feel it, because the weight has shifted, because the story has changed. These 7 signs, the absence of bitterness, the capacity to love what once harmed you, the silence that replaces your inner storm, the wisdom that emerges without words, the freedom found in acceptance, and the paradoxical joy that lives within sorrow. These are not destinations to arrive at some. Aye, they are moments of recognition available to you now in this very instant, if you have been paying attention to your own transformation. Hebrew word. Every soul undergoes its initiatory tests. Every consciousness is eventually asked to surrender what it thought it knew and to embrace a larger, more inclusive understanding of existence. These are not punishments or cosmic mistakes. They are invitations. Invitations to become more than you were. Invitations to access reserves of strength and compassion and wisdom you never knew you possessed. Invitations to discover that the very things you feared would destroy you have instead been the instruments of your liberation. The question is not whether you will face difficulty. The question is whether you will allow that difficulty to transform you or whether you will remain locked in resistance to it. Every moment offers you this choice. Every breath is an opportunity to accept what is and to discover the profound freedom that lives on the other side of that acceptance. Hebrew, trust that you are exactly where you need to be. Trust that your soul knows what it is doing, and trust that the tests you face are not signs of failure, but rather invitations to greatness. A message of gratitude and encouragement. Bara, thank you for taking this journey with me through these reflections. Thank you for being willing to examine your own transformation, your own capacity to transcend suffering and emerge wiser, kinder, and more whole. And to you, wherever you are in your own story, whether you are still in the depths of your test or you are just beginning to recognize the signs of your emergence, I offer this genuine wish. May you have the courage to feel what needs to be felt. May you have the wisdom to understand what needs to be understood. May you have the compassion to extend to yourself the same grace you so readily give to others. Ibra, you are stronger than you know. You are more capable of transformation than you imagine. And the very test that feels like she might break you is the means by which you will become unbreakable, not through rigidity, but through the profound flexibility that comes from having touched your own depths and finding there not emptiness, but infinite potential. Go forward with this knowing. The world needs exactly what your transformed soul has to offer. With deep respect and authentic wishes for your continued unfolding, Shibrach Hui, may your path be illuminated by the very darkness you have walked through.